Good morning. My name is Claire Helton. I feel like it's a little reverberating. I'm Claire Helton. My pronouns are she, her. I'm happy to see everybody. Welcome to each and everyone who's gathered here. It means something that you are here. It means something to you, and it means something to each of us to see your face here today. So we want to honor all of that meaning-making when we say that you and all the reasons that brought you here and all the reasons that you almost didn't come, all of that is welcome here. You are welcome here. We will now have our chalice lighting. Nate, our speaker, is going to light the chalice as I read. These words are adapted from Lee Kinby. This chalice is for the living, the changing, the becoming. It went out. The becoming. This chalice is for losing the script of your life, the chapters about who you are in other people's stories. This chalice is for the lost map that was supposed to show you how to get where they expected you to go. This chalice is for skipping the directions, coloring outside the lines, painting not by number, but by silence, by wild abandon, with a brush you made yourself from light deep inside. Startling, vivid, a new voice that already knows you. Finally, a true story. Now we'll have our video with our 8 principles. For today is Nate Schweigert. I will introduce him a little more thoroughly later in the service, but he's going to come read our opening words for us now.
Hello, everyone. Hi. This is The Slow Work of God by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Above all, trust in the slow work of God. We are quite naturally impatient in everything to reach the end without delay. We should like to skip the intermediate stages. We are impatient of being on the way to something unknown, something new. And yet it is the law of all progress that it is made by passing through some stages of instability, and that it may take a very long time. And so I think it is with you. Your ideas mature gradually. Let them grow. Let them shape themselves without undue haste. Don't try to force them one as though you could be today what time, that is to say, grace and circumstances acting on your own goodwill will make of you tomorrow. Only God could say what this new spirit gradually forming within you will be. Give our Lord the benefit of believing that His hand is leading you, and accept the anxiety of feeling yourself in suspense and incomplete.
We have hymn number 27. If you want to stand and join us, it's in the gray hymnal, I Am That Great and Fiery Force. If our choir wants to come up and lead us. If you would remain standing, I forgot to say it, sorry. We will recite our covenant together. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is law. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek truth in love, and to help one another. Thank you. You can be seated. It's time to sing the children out. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May your spirit of love surround you everywhere, The time now is for our offering. This is just a reminder that this is an organization that runs on donations. And so we invite you to share as you're able of all of the things that you bring to this place, your time, your energy, your talents. And in this moment, we offer our financial gifts. And if you don't carry cash like most of us, there is a way on the screen to donate on your phone. privilege now to introduce you all to Nate Schweigert. I actually met Nate in kindergarten, but then we didn't see each other for like 20 years. We found each other again in chaplaincy. We were in a cohort together at Baptist Hospital doing chaplain training. Nate is currently working on his Master's of Spiritual Care at Iliff University's Iliff School of Theology. And he is also a nature artist. You might have seen him if you've been at the Pensacola Palafox Market. He should be doing this. If you've seen him downtown, if you haven't, check out his booth. He's there pretty much every Saturday and all other kind of places around town. He does incredible artwork, exploring the intersections of nature and spirituality. He also is on social media. Hopefully he will give himself a little plug there, but if not, we'll send it in the newsletter. So, welcome, Nate Schweigert.
Okay, hello again. Yeah, thank you, Claire. Wow, hi everyone. Yeah, Claire had asked me to speak a couple months ago, and then I was a resounding yes, but I stand here currently as a person in process, as we all are, and potentially I'm in one of the most vulnerable spots that I've been in my life, so an interesting time to be up here before you to speak. I actually wondered if I should cancel this engagement. And my soul told me that that's potentially exactly why you should be here. That the world is so full of people in their shells who really get to show up as their most fully honest and true selves. And honestly, a lot of times it makes sense that we don't show up when we're like this out there in the world. But I just couldn't have known what state I would be in, and that's the beauty of the present moment, right? And the unknowingness of the future. Because when we say yes to vulnerability and change, as the two often go together, we say yes to risk. And sometimes that is a risk of failure, potentially financial or relational or bodily failure when we put ourselves out there. But also in the instability of risk is the risk of finding relational intimacy, of finding bodily healing and miracles, of finding new career paths and vocations, and ultimately we risk finding limitless possibilities of becoming. That said, I don't think anything has ever grown without growing pains. So today I wanted to explore this idea of biomimicry, which is a concept in Adrienne Marie Brown's book, Emergent Strategy. And she defines it as being the imitation of the model systems and elements of nature for the purpose of solving complex human problems. So I call this my lilies of the field theology. Like when Jesus was here, I grew up Christian, so it's a deep part of my understanding. And he would be like, look at the lilies of the field, look at the birds of the air. There's so much to learn from looking out at the natural world as to how do we move as humans, being a part of it as well through it. And in her book, Janine Benius says biomimicry is basically taking a design challenge and then finding an ecosystem that has already solved that challenge and literally trying to emulate what you learn. So I thought, what better to look at than a caterpillar, which in their processes of metamorphosis, which comes from the word to transform or to change shape, we could learn something. As we all know, caterpillars start by eating, right? They just eat everything that they see, and they live their whole beginning of their life devouring things. And I think for us, that can look like a building, in our initial stages, and sometimes maybe it's lifelong, that we build our ego, right? It's this thing that it's a healthy thing. It's how we physically survive on the planet. And it's based on our childhood experiences, our personality, the way we think the world works, how we relate to others, etc. But It's limited and it's structured and it's fixed and it's repetitive. It's something that feels predictable and safe, right? Like it's the thing that we go back to, the easy thing, often the most comfortable thing that we can do. But Carl Jung says that we spend the first half of our life developing a healthy ego. Potentially first half, maybe a quarter, maybe our whole lives, I don't know. But it can look like things like, for me, throughout my life, I found some of those beliefs to be like, I am what I achieve. My success is based on material gain, or I must get approval and validation from others. Things like, I am limited, life is a struggle, life is just hard. I must hide my emotions like anger or sadness. These things that we can develop to get through, right? But eventually the caterpillar, it does molt. And I thought it might be interesting to look at molting. It's something they do 5 times in their life. So it's an interesting process in the metamorphosis. And the details of it are quite fascinating. It starts by anchoring itself. So it sits still on a leaf and it crochets on its abdominal prolegs to attach itself to the surface. So it gets still, right, first. And then it splits, like the caterpillar forces fluid forward, causing the skin behind its head to split like a river breaking a dam. So if you can imagine this intense emerging, it spins some silk and then it begins to walk out of its old skin. So it leaves behind its old skin and then it eats that old skin, which is kind of a weird thing to imagine. But I think if we're looking at it from biomimicry, like this shedding of our old self becomes that nutrient, that thing. The past does matter, although we only exist in the present, but it's our fuel for that next stage or that next thing that we are going to do or grow into. Then it goes back to plants. It stops eating its dead skin and then it rests for a period of time. But I think what it shows us is that there is no molting, there is no growth without some form of death. And I think often with death comes grief. And the molting allows us to shed old ways of being or the ego, or I've recently been fascinated via my friend Kendall with Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism. And in it they call it klipot, which is like our shell or our husk that we have. And these can become barriers to the light of the Creator or to the eternal light. So we create these things because they're necessary for our human physical selves to survive, but we must grow through and out of those things. Eventually, the caterpillar creates a safe space, so all that molting, that 5 times, isn't even the metamorphosis, which is kind of wild to think about. Like, that process happening, that potentially painful process, is getting you to where you even need to be to get this chrysalis form that it eventually arrives at. I think the chrysalis is maybe like a dressing room or a closet of sorts. Happy Pride to everyone. The closet potentially, although one must emerge, can be a beautiful place of solitary understanding where we get to try on new versions of ourselves. And possibly that's the most authentic soul versions of ourselves that we try on. My chrysalis phase currently seems to be like 3 years long, so I'm not sure it's as short as a chrysalis for a caterpillar. And can't say that I've loved it, but the learning that has happened in it and the time to play inside of it once you settle in, it seems to be a beautiful space. Once the grief and the anxiety that accompany change, or often can, because of our attachment either to the past or our fear of what the future may hold, can become a beautiful place. So I thought we would watch a little video as to what this process of metamorphosis can feel like.
And what happened then? Well, in Whoville they say that the Grinch's small heart grew 3 sizes that day.
I think that was pretty accurate depiction. One other thing that I turn to in this time of vulnerability and change for me has been something. I was a tour guide in Alaska for 5 seasons, and while I was there, there was many forest fires going on, and many that are going on currently. I think some of them are deserving of grief as they are due to environmental causes, due to our impact. But at the same time, they have for thousands of years been a part of the process of restoration. One thing I learned when I was in Alaska is that the coniferous forest or the spruce trees eventually take over. So, and they call this, once it reaches that point where it's all spruce trees, they call it a closed forest. So that means that 70 to 100% of the light is not getting to the forest floor, and it's the only plant that takes over that landscape. The only way for it to come back to life, to regenerate, is a forest fire. So it needs that 200 plus degrees to open the seeds of the new spruce trees. And then the understory, the biodiverse understory, which I think maybe ironically, when we think of a forest, we only see trees, right? Which maybe tells us something. Like, we only see the biggest things, like the most important things, maybe like the political figures or the like people with fame or power or money, or these people stand out to us more than the fact that I imagine most of us don't hold those statuses, and we are a part of it as well, right? This biodiverse, which, happy Pride again, like this diversity is what makes and sustains the life on this forest. All of that low-lying like flora doesn't die because the fire doesn't go into the ground deep enough, and they come back. So the wildflowers, the shrubs are the first to come back, and then the birds and the insects and the moose and the things can come back and begin to eat again. It becomes a life-giving force, whereas before it had no life within it once it reached that point. And to me, that also signifies this idea, but maybe less individual than the metamorphosis. That feels like that might be happening for you internally, but whereas the forest is a collective, right? And so, like, personally, talking to my friends lately, it seems like a transformative time. Actually, do y'all want to raise your hand if you feel like maybe you've been on the precipice or in the middle or at the end of some deep change that feels like it's going on for you? Yeah, so I feel like that is helpful to hear and to see. And I was at the Palafox Market yesterday, and some lady asked me to tell her about my art, and I just was halfway through, and my heart seized, and my mouth stopped, and I started weeping. And I was like, I'm sorry. And then I was like, why do we always apologize for? Maybe it's helpful for people to see that we are all like in this collective resurgence or regeneration or time of change. I mean, I think even the earth has gone down like 5 times also, which, that's fascinating. Okay, maybe the earth is molting as well. It's gone like through the ice ages and things. Supposedly it's gone through 5 times where it's gone, 90% of all life forms have been wiped out, and then it has come back. And maybe the metamorphosis is coming, I don't know. But it's fascinating that that is how the natural world works. And I think sometimes we can forget that that's also how we work. We molt and we metamorphosize, is that a word? We change. So the earth has done it. I think that for me, that the Christ figure represents this death and rebirth. Nature represents this to us, and then we as humanity, I think, also represent this process. So for me, a motto lately, being an artist, that has come to me from painting, has been put the paint on the canvas and see what it becomes. I think in life, we can be so anxious about the future and so tied to the story of our past that we are afraid to do something. And I think it's in the stepping and the adding of the paint that it comes to us in that present moment, right? As you're painting, I don't know if any of you are artists, but like the inspiration simultaneously flows with the act of painting. And it emerges as you paint, not while you stare at it and imagine what it could be. I mean, that's a part of the process, but it's the painting that really brings the paint, or the act of painting that brings the painting to life. But as an artist, I think the most vulnerable moment where we can get stuck is when the painting first appears to be good. Like, you get attached maybe to this painting because you're like, I like it, but it's not the fullness of what I wanted it to be. It's not what I dreamed when I first started this painting, but it looks good enough that I could be done. And then we sit there, or I sit there, this is really subjective. I sit there and I leave that painting for a while because I'm scared to touch it. If I touch it, I'll ruin it, or it will leave good, and fear stops me. Like, I might ruin it. But I think that, like the caterpillar or the closed forest, that it's in that moment that we have the potential for risk. And again, risk can be fear-laden with failure, or risk can be the thing that brings all of it to life. It can be the transformation or the becoming, and the beauty of change. Octavia Butler is a feminist sci-fi writer, and she wrote Parable of the Sower. It's one of my favorite books. It's like a post-apocalyptic book about undergoing difficulty via forming community. And a quote in it that I really love, she says, "All that you touch, you change. And all that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change." And so I want to close with a reading of a short story that I wrote called The Days of Sophia. And it's about new ways of seeing, new ways of becoming, as we potentially leave the old narrative, or you could say return to the old narrative. I think there's a timelessness to this cycle that flows just as the butterfly eventually lays its eggs with a new caterpillar that starts to eat the egg. It's called The Days of Sophia. Ages ago, there was a boy born into the world. It was a day like any other for him, running around playing tag, building ramps in the woods for his bikes, climbing the decades-old magnolia to see out across the flatlands of his hometown, taking breaks now and then resting inside. But that's when he heard it. A long pause. Maybe it wasn't true. His neck hair stood up, his heart sunk. What was that noise, he thought. It was a question in his mind rather than a statement in order to keep his hope alive. It happened again. He was inside the house at that time, so he ran outside to see. Nothing was happening in the back of his house as he frantically looked around. It must be out front, he thought. It was then he saw it, and it was then his eyes told him what his heart already had. The moment he heard it. "No, stop!" he screamed as he ran over to his father, taking a chainsaw to one of his favorite climbing trees. While inside the house, he could feel the felling of limbs that overtook his friend's, the tree's, body as if it was his own body being delimbed. He was lightheaded from the blood loss of empathy as he stood at the scene of the crime in disbelief, utterly stunned and deeply betrayed. The pain of each limb too much to bear as he looked at the pecan tree that he had climbed every day of his able-bodied life, not knowing yesterday was his last. He knew there was no reversing what had already been done. The boy lost it in rage, screaming, "Why? staring so intently at both his parents, eyes shifting from one to the other and back again, demanding a reasonable answer for murder, knowing that there wasn't one. The father was so confused at such a response, but how would the boy's father have understood someone he spent so little time with? The boy's mother came over to comfort the boy as he continued to weep, saying, Why? As the rushing surge of rage seemed to lessen, the boy's mother told him that there were grubs in the tree, that they had compromised the tree, and that when the next hurricane came, it would have fallen, so they had to cut it down. He wondered how they could have known that. He also wondered why it would have mattered if it fell. He also wondered why they didn't tell him before or think to ask his permission. He also wondered how they were shocked at his response. Could they really have not known that the trees were a part of him? That they were the only ones who really knew him? I would tell you more of what he wondered in that moment, but you would be reading that list for hours, so I'll return back to the story. The boy was grateful for his mother's attempt to comfort him, but it wasn't enough. Nothing was ever enough for the boy, his mother thought. She couldn't bring back his friend, no one could, so the boy went out that night and sat by the tree stump, looking at the maze of tunnels in the trunk where the grubs had eaten to their content. The trunk was a headstone of sorts, as the boy were sitting in a graveyard at his own grave. As the boy stared at the remains of the tree, his eyes filled with tears, so much so that he could no longer see the tunnels carved out by the grubs. It was then he heard a voice and thought, there's no way this is true. There is a whole world, another world that cries with you, the tree said. I know none of your siblings are crying and your parents aren't crying, but there are many who are. Still shocked at the voice, the boy simultaneously felt chills run over his body, helping him to know that what the tree said was true. As the boy was lost in the moment, the tree continued. There is a world in which I lived, long before you. Back then, this place where you sit was all and only a forest of trees. Well, that and creeks and streams and deltas and oceans. Well, that and insects and birds and amphibians and loud cicadas and little moles and massive blue whales. Well, that and fungi and moss and lichen. Well, that and humans. But they were not like they are now. In fact, even then they had a different name. They were called Sophias, which in the language of the trees means wisdom. At this point, the boy's imagination was roaming, and this world that the tree was describing began to unfold before him as if he were there, and the tree was still speaking, saying, Oh, and there were grubs. But the grubs were never a reason to cut a tree down. There was still death back then, but what died was merely life given to another. Nothing was ever put in a plastic bag or embalmed, but everything went back into the life force. This was the essence of the human, an embodier of this Sophia, this wisdom. In fact, the Sophias had a wisdom chant eons ago that began saying, In the beginning were the trees, and the trees were with all things, and the trees were all things. At this point, the pecan tree could tell the boy was wondering again. In the tree's knowing, he told the boy, I bet you wondered how we got to the point of you sitting here listening to the roots of a dying tree. Well, let me tell you, before your parents come looking for you, as much as it may seem like they don't know you, they do care deeply for you. The same system that cut me down today is the one that separates them from you. We are all out here literally dying for connection. The boy finally felt comforted for the first time today, and he looked at the tree and he said, I'm ready when you are. The tree looked back at the boy and continued, One day, long ago, one of the Sophias got scared. A heavy wind was blowing, what you may today call a hurricane. And this Sophia got so scared that they convinced all the other Sophias around them that they must be prepared for the next big storm that might come through. And in the growing fear, the Sophias decided to cut down many trees and build homes with them. And over the many years that followed after that, they began cutting down trees for more than just their homes. They began cutting us down because they were afraid that they might fall in their houses, but also because certain ones weren't pretty enough or didn't flower enough or because it wasn't the right spot for that one. And any sign of rot or bugs or nearness to a home, and they would definitely cut us down just like they did to me. It is a way of existence that has been now for so long, it's really hard for me to remember when it began. I can only tell you this because of the wisdom that comes to me and the seeds of my ancestors. I can only tell you from the emotion within me that has few rational words for the large amount of knowing. The tree, again looking at the boy, felt it was time to tell him, saying, Did you know that you are a tree? The boy was shocked and confused, but given a few minutes, he sank into his body, leaving his brain behind, and there in his being, he knew it was true. The tree said, humans weren't the only Sophia, but in fact, back then, everything was Sophia. There was no difference between human, tree, bumblebee, or rock. We were all Sophia. We were all good. The tree then said, it would be strange if your mother told you that we were cutting down the Sophia because it had Sophias in it, right? This is the wisdom that you knew when you came running. You are Sophia. I am Sophia. The grubs are Sophia. There is nothing that is not Sophia. After moments passed of them sitting there together, the tree said, now we trees get scared when the hurricanes come. We used to be able to hold on to one another, sustain each other against the wind and rain, but now we sit in lawns of grass, like prison cells separating us from our community, far from the healing balm of interdependence. Most of us sit alone. When one used to fall, we became nutrients for the new saplings, but now when one falls, we are trucked away to landfills. We fall on houses actually intentionally to try to absorb the old growth forest ancestors that they used to build their houses. We want to return to the days of Sophia. It isn't even the wind and the rain we fear, but the hum and drum of chainsaws that will awaken when the storm passes. The dismemberment of our siblings, the grinding of our core, the same noise that awoke you while you were napping today. The boy sat there as chills continued running up and down his body, as tears streamed down his face. The tree again looked at the boy and said, I don't have many breaths left, but I have dropped many pecans and I have many Sophias of which you are one. You may feel alone, as we often do, but I am your sibling. We share the same mother. We are made of the same dust. Before I go, I want you to know that I don't fault you for living in a home, but don't forget that the box you live in separates you from your mother. Make sure you go out to her often and dig your feet in the soil and float in the ocean. Let her kiss your face with the wind. Let her warm body love you with the sun. Let her remind you often that we are all Sophia. The same thing that started this new way of existence will be told to you again and again. Be afraid, they will say in a million different ways. But as I lay here dying, I tell you, do not be afraid, for I am with you wherever you go. Sophia, my love, listen, you are not alone. Though they may find grubs and see it as a reason to cut you down, though every human may think it normal to pull out a chainsaw, it is not, and it never will be. The tree, beginning to lose its breath, looked at the boy one last time, knowing that though he was not able to be a nurse log to another tree, he was a nurse log to another Sophia. Though things were not as they used to be, they were in that brief moment. The tree didn't utter another word. The boy leaned down and he kissed the holes left by the grubs and went back inside. Before bed, he went into his parents' room and he asked if they could at least not grind the stump that was left in the yard. They agreed, and the next day he made a headstone and placed it on the stump. Later that day, while he was busy playing out back, his mom opened the screen door, stuck her head outside, and shouted, "My sweet boy, who is Sophia?" The end. So thank you for having me. That's all I have.
Invite the choir to come up. We will sing hymn number 203 in the gray hymnal, All Creatures of the Earth and Sky.
Creatures of the earth and sky, sun with golden beam, such training
May you trust the flow. May you trust the yes, and may you trust the no. When you wonder, is this for holding on or for letting go? May you trust your body, your heart, and your soul, because they know, they know, they know. Thank you.